Step into the frontier of 1870, a land of isolation, dust, and shadows. Before the story unfolds, share where you're watching from and the exact time you hear this account. We want to track when and where these echoes of the past reach modern ears. This is the story of Esther Wade, a woman whose life left faint but disturbing traces across the frontier, a trail that the wind and hills still seem to guard carefully, waiting for someone brave enough to follow. In the spring of 1870, in the rough stretches of the American frontier, a name existed that no one dared speak aloud: Esther Wade. She arrived alone, her presence quietly unsettling the settlers who had carved their lives from the unforgiving land. At first, she seemed like any other woman trying to survive, carrying her few belongings through dust and wind, her footsteps leaving faint impressions in the hills that would, in time, become more than mere tracks. But soon, whispers followed her, rumors that she brought misfortune, that the earth itself shifted when she passed, that livestock vanished and crops failed after her visits. Some swore they saw shadows moving where no shadow should fall, shapes bending against the light of the campfires. Others claimed they heard her voice calling from places she had never been, a voice that carried through the night like it belonged to the land itself, rather than a living human. No written record explains what happened. No diary entry or town ledger mentions the events directly. Yet every account from that spring hints at a presence that unsettled the community in ways words cannot capture. Entire families relocated, houses abandoned, paths left untrodden for decades. And still, traces remained. Signs in the soil, marks in the trees, things that were not meant to be seen by human eyes. The question that lingers, as it has for nearly a century and a half, is simple. What did Esther Wade do, or perhaps endure, to earn the quiet exile of her name from history? And why did the people who knew her behave as if speaking of her aloud could summon misfortune upon themselves? Tonight, we will attempt to trace her steps, reconstruct the trail of her life, and explore the events that the frontier tried to erase. The answers may be impossible to confirm, yet the echoes of those days remain. The hills, the wind, the trees, they remember. The land where Esther arrived was harsh and unyielding. Rolling hills stretched under a pale sky, dotted with sparse timber and the occasional crooked fence marking a failed homestead. The air was dry yet heavy, carrying the scent of earth and ash from distant fires. Birds called and fell silent in the same instant, as if aware of intruders moving through their domain. It was a frontier where survival was measured in days, not years. Every cabin leaned on the other for protection. Every path between settlements was traveled cautiously, as the wilderness demanded both respect and vigilance. In this unforgiving expanse, Esther walked alone. Her clothing hung loosely, practical, yet there was something about the way she carried herself that unsettled those who glimpsed her. She did not run from the elements or the dangers, yet her steps were deliberate, almost measured, like someone who knew the land better than it knew her. At night, the hills seemed to change shape. Shadows stretched longer than they should, and the wind whispered through the crevices in ways that made the trees appear to lean toward whoever passed. Campfires flickered and sputtered, as if aware of her presence, and the flickering light revealed brief glimpses of her silhouette, moving with quiet intent. Even the townsfolk who never interacted with her felt her presence, an absence so heavy it could be sensed on the skin, a weight in the air that pressed against the lungs. Those who tried to follow her trail quickly found themselves lost. Paths that were once clear seemed unfamiliar. Rocks, hills, and streams shifted in ways that defied memory. Many settlers claimed they had walked the same trail countless times, yet when tracing her route, the land refused to obey them. It was as though the very frontier conspired to protect her secrets, leaving only traces that teased the imagination and invited questions that could never be answered fully. At first, the incidents were subtle, easy to dismiss. A cow missing in the morning, footprints that appeared where none should exist, a sudden chill that left no visible source. But gradually, the unease escalated. Children swore they saw Esther standing in fields at times when she could not have been there, and adults reported hearing her voice calling names they did not recognize. Each day brought a new oddity. Lanterns swung on their own in empty cabins. Doors were found open when they had been carefully locked. Some settlers awoke to find possessions moved or scattered, but no human tracks were present. People began to whisper, exchanging glances and half-finished sentences, refusing to speak too loudly about what they saw, as if acknowledging it aloud might solidify its reality. Esther herself began to change, or so the stories suggest. Her expression grew distant. She spoke less, her words measured, each one chosen with care. The few who approached her reported an unsettling feeling, as though the very ground underfoot was listening, responding to her presence. Animals recoiled from her, dogs yelping and horses refusing to cross paths she had trodden hours before. And then the weather seemed to bend around her. Storms that should have dissipated lingered. Mists rolled in unexpectedly. Snow fell in patches during spring mornings. Every natural rhythm felt disrupted, leaving the settlers anxious and the frontier alive in ways they could not explain. Fear was not loud. It was a constant low hum in the chest, a pressure that tightened every time her name was spoken. No one could understand it, and no one dared question it too directly. The threads of normal life were unraveling, and Esther Wade was at the center, a figure both human and beyond comprehension. One night, a small group of settlers ventured near the ridge where she was last seen. They reported a sight none could describe clearly. A figure moving slowly, gliding rather than walking, her shadow elongated and fractured across the hills. Her face was obscured by moonlight and mist, yet they were certain it was her. They spoke of objects rising from the earth around her, stones and branches levitating briefly, then falling without cause. Lanterns swung violently as though caught in a sudden wind, but the air remained still. A distant howl echoed across the hills, followed by silence so complete that even the insects seemed to vanish. Some swore they saw shapes crouching behind trees, following her movements, yet when they approached, nothing remained. Others claimed that the wind carried her voice, calling names in the familiar tones of loved ones, drawing the settlers toward places they would rather not go. The few brave enough to linger said that for a moment the frontier itself seemed to bend to her will, hills curving, shadows deepening, darkness stretching further than night should allow. No one could explain what they had seen. They returned to their cabins pale and silent, refusing to speak of it. And still, traces remained on the hills, impressions in the soil that could not have been made by human feet, trees marked in patterns too deliberate to be natural, and the faint echo of a woman's laughter or sobs that lingered long after the air had cleared. Over the weeks, the stories of Esther Wade grew. People reported seeing her in two places at once, or glimpsing her on hillsides they had walked many times before, only to find the tracks gone upon closer inspection. Her presence seemed to stretch time and space, leaving those who encountered her uncertain of their own memory and perception. Her life, as it could be reconstructed from fragments, was a puzzle. She had arrived quietly, yet she carried with her experiences and knowledge that no one understood. Some accounts suggested she had been involved in rituals or events that the town could not comprehend. Others hinted at personal losses or betrayals that left her isolated, an outcast among settlers who were themselves hardened by hardship. At night, the frontier became a theater of subtle terror. Shadows elongated unnaturally. Wind carried whispers of names long forgotten. Items disappeared and reappeared in places that made no sense. Some reported finding symbols etched into stones, patterns repeated across miles of hills, forming designs that seemed to move when not observed directly. Families left. Houses were abandoned. Paths that had been traveled for years became avoided. And through it all, Esther Wade moved silently, leaving traces that teased, but never revealed, the full scope of her story. It was as though she had become part of the frontier itself, a figure intertwined with the hills, the trees, the very air that the settlers breathed. Those who sought her never found more than glimpses and whispers, fragments of a life that refused to be fully known. Each sighting raised more questions than answers. Each disappearance left gaps in memory, and the legend continued to grow, quietly, in the minds of those who remembered, shaping the frontier into a landscape that seemed both familiar and impossibly strange. No records explain what ultimately became of Esther Wade. Some say she vanished into the hills, leaving only whispers and traces behind. Others claim she remained, unseen, moving through the frontier in ways that human eyes could not follow. Those who knew her, or thought they did, were left with a lingering uncertainty, a fear of acknowledging what they had encountered. Her story is more than a tale of one woman. It is a reflection of isolation, of the unknown edges of human experience, and the ways in which fear and wonder intertwine. Even today, those who traverse the same hills speak in hushed tones, hesitant to name her. The echoes of her passage remain in the wind, in the shape of shadows, in moments where memory and reality seem to blur. And perhaps that is the lasting imprint of Esther Wade, the sense that some events cannot be contained, that some presences will endure, not through violence, but by the questions they leave behind. If you were walking these hills alone, would you feel the weight of a presence you could not see? Would you notice the signs etched into the ground, the whispers carried by the wind, the way the night seemed to shift in response to you? Some say the frontier still remembers, that even after a century and a half, the steps of Esther Wade remain, moving silently through the land. If you are brave enough to hear her story, to trace the trail she left behind, subscribe to Dark Room of Whispers. More stories await, each hidden in the folds of history, each echoing through the places we thought we understood. And remember, the hills are patient, they never forget.